Yesterday, we looked at the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th verses of our text. And within the extensive presentation of the ground, these were all concerned with pointing out the danger of bewilderment or errors with regard to understanding the ground, the need to abandon such errors, and the possibility of doing so. Today, we're going to look at the 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th verses, which, by means of 4 analogies, explain the reasons why the qualities of an authentic understanding of the ground can be developed and need to be developed. The first of these 4 verses is verse 11. And verse 11 is concerned with the fact that if you, through meditation on the mind's nature, or otherwise put on dharmata, come to realize it or recognize it, this recognition or realization will itself pacify or remove all defects and problems. These problems and defects could be of various types. The presence of a lot of disturbing thoughts or strong kleshas, experience of intense sadness or regret. In any case, through the recognition of mind's nature, as this would be put in the context of mahamudra, these problems can be removed. The manner in which this is possible is explained in this verse by means of analogy. The analogy here is the water of the ocean. Now, we cannot drink seawater because it is salty. Nevertheless, when the ocean's water is sublimated into the atmosphere, gathers in clouds, and having been drawn up into the clouds, returns to the earth as rain, it is sweet. It is no longer salty, and therefore it is fit to drink. That is the analogy. The meaning of this analogy of the salty water of the ocean is as follows. We continually give rise to various forms of mental affliction. For example, when we encounter an external object that causes us to become angry, we generate anger, which causes us to become unhappy. And if we act out on the basis of the anger, then it can cause others to suffer as well. Otherwise, sometimes we are frustrated by the failure of our endeavors. We generate great anxiety and become miserable, often for our whole lives. In these situations, or in the situation of the generation of any strong klesha, usually it seems to us that the klesha, or suffering that arises in the mind, is very solid and powerful. It seems more intense and therefore more powerful than us ourselves. But if you look at the mind's nature and meditate on the mind's nature, you discover that all of the things that arise in your mind, thoughts and kleshas and sadness and misery, are mere appearances. Which is to say, if you scrutinize them, if you look to see what they are really and where they are really, you discover that they are empty of substance and location. When you look directly at the thoughts and kleshas and misery that arises in your mind, you never find, it is here, I have found where it is, or it has this form, or is made up of this stuff or substance, it has this shape or color. You never find any of these things. Now, scrutiny here means scrutiny of the thought within the mind, not scrutiny of the object that inspired or was the condition for the arising of the klesha, but scrutiny of the thought itself. And when you perform this scrutiny, you directly observe the emptiness of the thought. Now, whether this arises in the context of your performing benefit for others as is mentioned in the verse when it says the stable mind works to benefit others, or simply in the context of benefiting yourself, what happens when you see the nature of thoughts is that the previously poisonous quality of the thought, the klesha and suffering, is transformed into a situation of great benefit. So therefore, the poison of objects turns into amrita or nectar. We believe that kleshas are terrible and that thoughts are bad, that sadness is a shame. But the nature of these things that arise in our minds is faultless bliss. It is because we do not recognize the nature of these mental arisings that we are afflicted by them. Thoughts, in and of themselves, are not bad because their nature is peace. Now, kleshas, as long as they arise as affliction, are of course a problem, but their nature too is great peace. When you recognize the nature of thoughts and kleshas and sadness, you recognize that the nature is like amrita, and therefore that effectively is the transformation of the poison of thoughts and kleshas into amrita. Now, in the context of the gradual instruction of mahamudra, this is called looking at the mind within occurrence. It is normally preceded by the practice of looking at the mind within stillness. Looking at the mind within stillness means that within a stable state of meditation, one looks directly at one's own mind. Specifically, one looks to see where the mind is, if anywhere, and what the mind is, if anything. Through this scrutiny, one eventually discovers that there is no location to be found and no substance of mind to be found. And in that way, one resolves experientially that the mind is empty. Here, in this verse, what is being presented is what in practical instruction is called looking at the mind within occurrence. Occurrence, or movement, means the occurrence or emergence of a thought within the mind. The thought could be any kind of thought: an angry thought, a jealous thought, an arrogant thought, a desirous thought, a sad thought. It could be a happy thought, a compassionate thought. In any case, whatever the content of the thought may be, in this practice, when you recognize that a thought has arisen, you look directly at it. You look at the thought and see its nature, which, like the nature of the mind itself, is discovered to be without location and without stuff or substance. It is empty. So, through the practice of looking at the mind within the occurrence of thought, you transform the mind's apparent poison into amrita, which is its nature. That is the 11th verse. The 12th verse is concerned with the benefit of realizing the inexpressible. The inexpressible here refers to emptiness. Now, when we use the word emptiness or empty, it sounds very threatening. It has the literal meaning of nothing, so therefore it sounds like some kind of annihilation. It sounds very negative. But the nature of emptiness is great peace or great bliss. So therefore, while we may fear the realization of emptiness, in the misunderstanding that the realization of it will produce the annihilation of experience, on the contrary, the realization of emptiness is the realization of great peace, great peace.
也看你说什么，真的希望当对吧？你个对这的拉呢，真的千把拉上。
I had to translate that. That was too good to miss. That is the second most embarrassing slip I've ever done. All right, let's start again. Great piss. Oh boy. Now where am I? Great peace or great bliss. Great tranquility, let's say that. So, when the realization of emptiness occurs, it is contrary to what we fear it will be, an experience of great tranquility or great bliss. So therefore, there is within emptiness nothing that inherently justifies or requires the fear with which we tend to view it. It is not in and of itself negative or threatening. Now, the word emptiness, of course, connotes nothingness and makes us think of something like empty space, a mere absence, such as the absence of any kind of qualities or content. But the mind's emptiness is what in traditional Dharma terminology is called emptiness endowed with the best of all aspects. This means that while the mind is empty, it is not nothing. It is cognitive lucidity. This means, for example, that when you look at your mind, while you do not find or see the mind, or find or see thoughts in terms of their having a location or possessing substantial characteristics, and therefore, while it is the case that the mind and the mind's thoughts are empty, they are not nothing. They are not nothing because the mind's display of cognition is unceasing. Therefore, the absence of true or substantial existence of the mind does not mean that the mind is dead, like a stone. Therefore, the realization of this absence of true existence does not cause the cessation or annihilation of experience. The mind, while being empty of any kind of entity or substantial existence, remains an unceasing cognition. But while the mind is an unceasing cognition, when you look for it, you can't find it anywhere. In fact, it is because the mind is empty that it is unchanging. If the mind were not empty, if the mind had solidity or substantial existence, then it would definitely change. So the mind's emptiness, which is here called the inexpressible, or that which is beyond the intellect, is the reason why the mind is unchanging. And because the mind is unchanging, it is, in its nature, great bliss. The analogy in verse 12, I'm going to try to speak more slowly because I don't want that to happen again. The analogy in verse 12 is of the sound of thunder. And here, the sound of thunder represents emptiness, or more precisely, our concept of emptiness. A child, for example, may be frightened by the sound of thunder and may perceive it as threatening. But when you think about it, thunder, and this is a particularly apt analogy here, is a good thing, because thunder is a sign of rain, and rain ripens the crops. In the same way, while we tend to think of emptiness as threatening and as negative, in fact, its nature is great bliss, and therefore the realization of emptiness is not inherently threatening. The 13th verse is concerned with the lack of inherent differentiation between the three times, past, present, and future, in there being the unity of appearance and emptiness, and how realization of that brings forth the realization of the unity of emptiness and compassion. When we consider the mind's nature, or the nature of the thoughts that arise in the mind, we assume that these things must begin or have begun somehow and somewhere. they must remain, and they must at some point end or cease. But when we actually look at the mind and at the nature of thoughts, for example, when you look to see how a thought arises, what actually happens when a thought arises or starts, you don't find anything or anyone that generates or creates the thought, nor do you find a manner or location of true arising. When you then look to see what the presence or abiding of a thought within the mind consists of, when you look to see what the thought abides as or how it abides, what characteristics it possesses, and where the thought is located, where it abides. When you look to see whether the thought, while it is apparently present in the mind, has any substantial characteristics such as color and shape. When you look for these to see if the thought has these characteristics, and if so, what they are, and if the thought does not have these characteristics, what it does possess, you don't find them. When you look to see where the thought is, while it is still vividly present within the mind, you can't find it anywhere. The thought is not specifically located at any place within the body, nor without the body, nor some kind of area in between. So in that way, not only does the thought not truly arise, it does not truly abide. And when a thought disappears, when you look at the dissolving or disappearance of a thought to see what really happens when a thought disappears, where a thought goes, what the disappearance of a thought really consists of, you don't find anything. In that way, thoughts do not truly arise, do not truly abide, and do not truly cease. Now, whether this is recognized or not, the nature of your mind has always been just this. It is not the case that the discovery of this makes it so. It was always so. The problem is that we have never looked at the mind. We've always turned away from it. Now, this is the meaning of the analogy given in the 13th verse. This verse also answers the question, what qualities are produced by meditation on or realization of emptiness? The essence of Dharma, the purpose of Dharma, is to help others. And the root of helping others is compassion. But if all things are empty, and if the emptiness of things is realized, is there therefore no object, and therefore no root of compassion? This verse answers that question, and the answer is that that is not the case. As was pointed out by the third Karmapa Rangchung Dorje in his aspiration of mahamudra, the very recognition of emptiness itself is the root of compassion. The reason for this is that when you recognize the emptiness of mind's nature, the emptiness of things, this produces a state of well-being and tranquility of mind. Therefore, mental afflictions are pacified, and suffering is pacified. This naturally produces all manner of qualities within the mind of the person who realizes it. At the same time, because the realization is the realization of the abiding nature, it includes the understanding that all beings without exception possess this same nature, that is to say, this same potential for all of the qualities achieved through realization. At the same time, you who realize it do so through the good fortune of having recognized the nature of your mind, and in that way your suffering is pacified. Whereas all beings, in general, not knowing to look at their mind, and therefore not recognizing the nature of the mind and the nature of the thoughts, follow thoughts, are caught by thoughts, and therefore generate kleshas and suffering. But because their basic nature is the same as the nature of you who have realized that nature, you see through that realization that all of this suffering is really unnecessary. Because beings possess this nature, it is not inherently necessary that they suffer at all. The realization of this is the reason why the realization of emptiness is the root of compassion. As was written by the third Jamgon Karmapa, may intolerable compassion be born in my mind through the realization of emptiness. The compassion that is born through realization is intolerably intense. The 14th verse is concerned with the fact that while all beings without exception possess the same nature of the mind, it is the possession of this nature or presence of this nature is not enough. It must actually be cognized and meditated upon. And again, the analogy of an expert and a fool, or a wise being and a foolish being, is used. Here, however, the wise being or expert is a positive analogy, and the foolish being is a negative analogy. It's the opposite from the last time. The analogy is the following. In a lake, there is a lotus flower, and in the midst of that lotus flower, there is nectar, the potential for honey. A bee, who here represents the wise, recognizes the presence of the nectar within the lotus flower and imbibes it, tastes it. In that same way, the wise or learned know of the existence of the mind's nature and therefore meditate on it and realize it. The foolish, on the other hand, or the unwise, are like a frog, and the frog lives in the lake adjacent to the lotus flower, but does not know of the nectar that is in the flower's center, and therefore does not partake of or enjoy it. So this, the frog signifies the fact that in general, while all beings have the same nature of the mind, not knowing of this, they do not meditate on it and therefore do not experience or recognize it. So with those 4 verses, I'm going to stop the principal instruction for this morning. However, yesterday during the group interviews, I became aware that there are many new students here who are quite new to the practice of Dharma and the practice of meditation. First of all, addressing them, I would like to say thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in Dharma practice. And then secondly, for your benefit, I would like to say some things about the practice of Shine, or tranquility meditation. The practice of tranquility meditation has 2 aspects. The physical aspect, which is the correct physical posture for meditation practice, and the mental aspect, which is the actual mental technique of bringing the mind to rest. With regard to physical posture, I think that nowadays, because of the prevalence of meditation practice, because you have no doubt already had some exposure to meditation practice and practiced with other people, I assume that you already know of meditation posture, which is normally referred to as the 7 dharmas of Vairochana. And because I expect that you already understand it and know how to take the posture, I'm not going to explain it. So I'm going to begin by talking about the mental technique, which is how to bring the mind to rest. And this has 3 aspects or 3 stages, which are grasping the mind when it is ungrasped, stabilizing the mind once it has been grasped, and bringing progress or enhancement to the mind that has already been stabilized. The first, grasping the mind when it is ungrasped, means starting to get a hold of or be able to work with your mind when you have not yet been able to do so. Stabilizing the mind means bringing it to a stable state of tranquility, and enhancement or progress refers to deepening that. First of all, what we call mind is that which knows, that which experiences, that which thinks all the various thoughts that it does. And when we have not practiced meditation, of course, a lot of thoughts arise in our minds. These thoughts can be quite intense, and they're also unstable. What we are doing initially in the practice of tranquility meditation is allowing the mind to become pacified, to come to rest. And therefore, tranquility is the mind coming to abide in a state of peace or tranquility. And this process is like the subsiding or calming of waves on the surface of an ocean. Therefore, it was written by the third Jamgon Karmapa, may the waves of coarse and subtle thoughts be pacified in their own place, and may the river of mind come to rest in its own state without movement or without wavering. So the first step in bringing the mind to rest and stability in this way is getting hold of the mind when you have not yet gotten hold of it. This is not getting better. Now, the faculties that we use to get hold of the mind are faculties that we have innately. So the process consists of heightening, reinforcing, or developing these two faculties. The two faculties are recollection or memory, which is often translated mindfulness in the context of meditation, but it's recollection, and alertness. Now, these two faculties together are what enable your mind to know what it is doing. The recollection of an intent or purpose, and the conscious ability to be alertly aware of what is transpiring in the mind. So, for example, these enable you to recollect or retain the intention to meditate and be able to observe what is transpiring. These two faculties are faculties of the mind's inherent lucidity. And it is these and the mind's lucidity in general that need to be stabilized through the practice of tranquility meditation. In order to do this, and in particular when you are unused to the practice of meditation, it is helpful to have a support, and you hold the mind to or tether the mind to that support. The most commonly used support is the breathing. As was said by the Buddha, if thoughts are the foremost concern, follow the breath in and out. Now, the following of the breath can be done in various ways. There are many different techniques for doing this. But in any case, you are simply using the breathing as an object or anchor to which to hold or tether the mind. Another type of focus for the practice of tranquility that is commonly taught in mahamudra instruction is called holding the mind to an external support, which is an object of visual perception that is outside oneself. This has two basic varieties: holding the mind to a mundane or impure support, which usually is either a short stick or a pebble, and holding the mind to a supramundane or pure support, which is typically a small image of the Buddha. This technique is very helpful for beginners because we are so outwardly focused, and therefore it's sometimes an easy one to begin with. When one performs this technique, however, one does not reflect upon or analyze the characteristics or appearance of the object. The technique here is to hold the mind to the object in the simple sense of not forgetting the presence of the object as an object of direct visual perception. For example, if you are using an impure support, you simply gaze at the pebble or short stick, and simply the effort is in not losing sight of or not losing track of its presence. If you're using a pure support, a small image of the Buddha, in the same way, you tether your mind to it with just enough effort so that you do not lose track of the object's presence before you. You do not reflect upon the characteristics or qualities of the object. For example, in the case of using an image of the Buddha, you do not attempt to cultivate faith and devotion for the Buddha in this context, but simply remain attentive to the presence of it before you. In this way, you're cultivating a type of alertness and awareness that is neither too tight nor too loose. You simply apply enough effort so that you do not lose track of the object. Therefore, this technique can, in some circumstances, facilitate bringing the mind to rest in a relaxed way. Sometimes when people practice holding the mind to an external support, they experience that their eyes start to sting or smart. People don't say smart in the States, do they? They do? Okay. All right. Or otherwise, sometimes you may actually get to the point where you start to see double. If your eyes start to hurt, or you see two of the object and there is in fact only one of it, you're probably being too tight, either with the physical use of the eyes or with the mind. You, in this technique, you look at the object, but you don't glare at it. And you tether your mind to the object, but you don't attempt to intensely nail your mind to the object. Especially if you find that you're seeing double, then you should relax the mind and the gaze. Now, another technique is holding the mind within. Rather than holding the mind to an external object, holding the mind within, which in this context means holding the mind within itself. Now, this is simply resting in the mind's native or inherent cognitive capacity, the mind's ability to cognize, to know, the mind's natural lucidity. And you allow the mind to naturally and easily come to rest without thought in its own clarity. And this is very much like what was described in the previous quotation, if I can find it. May the waves of coarse and subtle thoughts be pacified in their own place, and may the river of mind come to rest of itself or in its own nature without movement. In this technique, you simply allow the mind to come to rest easily and naturally. And when within that, or from within that, a thought arises, you neither follow nor suppress the thought. But upon becoming aware of the thoughts arising, you simply return to the state of tranquility. The benefit of this latter technique is explained in a quotation from Machiklab Jidronma, who said, "The physical technique is to relax the four limbs and the mental technique is to let go of perception. In general, of course, we say that the physical technique or the physical posture is the correct meditation posture, the 7 dharmas of Vairocana. But aside from adopting this posture, in doing so, one does not attempt to engage in any kind of physical or especially muscular tension. Within the parameters of the correct posture, one seeks to relax the body as much as possible. This needs to be said because when one attempts to focus the mind and in that way produces a state of tautness or mental tension, the body will automatically tense up as well. With regard to her second statement, that the mental technique is to let go of perception, when we practice meditation, we are employing the faculties of recollection and alertness. The employing of these faculties can produce mental tension. So it therefore needs to be said and needs to be done that one has to let go of the tension that will otherwise come up, which in her words is let go of perception or fixated perception. In that way, one has to relax both the body and mind. So that is how to hold the mind or get hold of the mind when it has not been gotten hold of, and I'm going to stop there for this morning.